Chapter 9, 9.3 Andrei. Remembering Zhenya, Andrei, my cousin Ruslan, some screw-loose women, I couldn't help but think why they all were doing this to me. Why they all would betray and desert me. I had never started any relationship with them ever since, but I always would have gotten attached to them first. Was it me all the time something wrong with? I didn't make friends with Andrei immediately in the class either. He was strong, athletically built, but still, he wasn't of any high-profile kind of a guy. He seldom fought, so he never was good at that. He never had a say in his class, and he was of no interest to me either, even though he went to athletics. However, in his third or second grade, I remembered him involved in a scandal. He brought homemade porn pictures styled on as playing cards to school, all black and white and of poor quality. He must have stolen them from his older brother. He handed the cards out to his classmate, and they had made their way to our teacher. The scandal was cosmic. I still picture the teacher frisking him. She even pulled his socks off. I remember I was amazed how quickly he cracked on everything, on how he got those cards, how many of them there were, etc. If I had myself caught on something like this, I would do anything to weasel out of it. I would never admit anything. I always got myself in trouble for it from my parents, school and kindergarten teachers. He had a sponge-like memory. All the books he had read he remembered almost by heart. He would read for 6 hours at a time. I would never be able to read for more than 2 hours without a break. He would read science fiction for the most part. He also tried to write his own stories, which, though misspelled, had made a strong impression on us. At the same time, he was doing not that well at school. He was neglecting his schoolwork. He was really bad with Russian classes, just like me. I at least didn't make spelling errors, as he did, and his math was just as bad as mine. He liked drawing though, but he wasn't good at that either, because I loved drawing myself and knew a little bit more about painting. I had an uncle the artist after all. By the way, I would ask those who idealize the Soviet education system as the best in the world to pay some attention to the fact why such on the whole gifted kids would still be doing badly at school. Perhaps something was wrong in the Soviet school, in the system approach, don't you think? Andrei would regularly come up with his ideas of constructing a steam engine, a wing glider, crossbows, or putting a play in the school assembly hall on something about space frontier pioneers, or even something similar to young volunteers. All these would go to nothing, but the beginning always of pompous. Once we came up with yet another secret society. We had even made its charter, admitted some chosen ones to our brotherhood, and solemnly sworn allegiance to each other to death, to save the world and catch the spies. We were not close friends up until 6th grade. Once in the summer, he suddenly came to our place and spent the whole day with us. He brought along his homemade firearm. It would take a while to fire with. You would have to spend some time to load it with the red heads for gunpowder taken individually from each match, then ram it well inside the barrel with a ramrod made of a steel wire, then further load it up with pieces of wire or a pellet, then set the light at a tiny hole on the barrel side. Damn! I still keep wondering how the hell we had managed to keep our eyes, fingers, or arms intact, or in their places the way we were shooting, blowing, and burning stuff. We had not shot that day though. He was a boring kind of guy to me. Things changed when he first brought his father's 3D camera to school, the very first one manufactured before World War II. I had some basic ideas about photography before that, much more than most peers of my age had. My dad was printing the photos, having us, his kids, helping him with that. But I never knew how to take pictures. My dad never taught me that. I think after his failed attempt to teach me to play chess, he probably thought that I was an untrainable stupid dork and never bothered to train me of anything else ever since. Well, with Andrei, I immediately figured out what was the shutter speed in the aperture for. So, through photography, I started to pal around with him. Soon we developed our first films and printed our first pictures at my house. They were not that bad for a starter. My dad had a FED2 camera, a more sophisticated post-World War II version. My father's first major purchase when he made his first money in the mine after school and before he was recruited to the army. Now I know they both were the German Leica replicas. Now I had a dream to buy myself a Belarusian camera Villia, which I always admired in the electronic and photo store on my way home after my music classes. Its price tag read 24 rubles. Not that beyond the reach even for me. And I had the motivation to make my first money. It was then when we started to organize our secret societies or tried to invent something. We had dreams of buying a film camera. In the spring of 1978, my father was given 2 rooms communal apartment and we moved to the nearby town. But I continued to go to the school and I hoped to stay here. That would never happen. My attachment to Andrei grew, especially after I had moved to the town. I had no friends. We regularly visited each other. We kept photographing and our pictures' quality constantly grew. My dad gave us some fleeting lessons on paper selection and developing chemical preparation. Criticizing our pictures in his usual grouchy and even rude manner, he unwittingly planted the composition, lighting, and other photography artistic tricks on us, and that very year summer my dad had finally said that I had learned to take good pictures and now I was a full-fledged photographer. I cooperated fine with Andrei. I had my father's enlarger and Andrei the enlarger lens. So I no longer had to use my father's FED2 camera's lens to print the pictures. My parents liked Andrei much better than Sergei. My name was no longer at the teacher-parents conference, it was with Sergei's before. Andrei instilled in me a passion for photography. Our shared apartment neighbors also liked Andrei. In the summer holidays, I often went to Andrei's, almost every day. I mean, I liked living in the town, but I missed my Vinsari friends I still had known in town. I helped him to graze his cows. He also would come to visit me. Every year in spring a racing season would open in our place, and people from the whole Caucasian mineral water would come to bet the horses. It was one of the few legal and government-controlled gambling businesses. I took the job as a delivery boy, and on weekends I collected bet lists from the kiosks and delivered them to the accounting. I was making money to buy me a camera and also helping my parents to pay out their debt to creditors. They had failed in their flower business. Any kind of private enterprises were illegal in the socialistic USSR, and now they were heavily in debt. I wrote about these in my first chapter, and I finally got my coveted camera by the summer. With this camera I came to Andrei. He was not home. He turned out to have gone to the Yessentuki hospital for the surgery to have his tonsils removed. I was lost a bit. He never told me about anything like that coming up. No one had told me anything. Andrei's mother, seeing how upset I was, reassured me he would be back in a week. At the time, he was my only friend. I was at odds both with Zhenya and Sergei, and I still had no friends in town. I think I had my first experience of loneliness and got scared of that. In a week, he was back all right. I was so glad to see him again. He was telling me how he was entertaining his roommates in the hospital, telling them the Conan Doyle, the Lost World novel he knew by heart, and how they also threw out of the windows the balloons filled with water. It was fun. Then I was at his place, and for the first time I saw him a bit annoyed. To my innocent question when he was going to buy him his many symbol camera he always wanted, produced by Loma, the famous lomography manufacturer, by the way, company, which pretty much look like my villa, both externally and by specs, but 1 ruble cheaper, 23 rubles. He suddenly blew up at me. Why the hell is that to you when I buy? I buy it whenever I feel like it, understood? I said nothing. What the hell was wrong with him? Unfortunately, it took too long for me to figure out who was the source of his irritation. Soon in July, we went to our school to pay our labor duty. We got enrolled with Andrei to a group of 4 people who were to collect soil samples from all parts of a collective farm we were assigned to. We liked it there. We were riding in a vast Jeep vehicle all day long on the fields, stop here and there to dip up samples and put them in marked bags. I still hoped to stay in this school. It would have worked just fine with me. It would only take half an hour for me to get there by commuter bus. I didn't know yet that my parents had a different opinion on that matter. And something was getting wrong with Andrei. He started snarling at me really bad. And Valera, with eager I always kept both in check, felt that right then and started coming together against me. I didn't like it at all. Things were getting dangerous to me. Igor once got so brazen to dare to come on to me. He got his ass kicked out good for that, all right. I was getting really bad myself. I didn't know what the fuck was going on with Andrei there. Okay, I said to myself. Once Andrei comes to visit me, I will have a really serious talk with him. But no longer would he come to me. He would turn down my invitations, and his attitude towards me kept deteriorating. Valera started raising his voice at me, and when I went to show him his place, Andrei all of a sudden took his side. I managed to avoid any open conflicts with him so far, but it certainly was going to this. That was my first experience of this kind. I felt betrayed. But why? What had I done to him? That's what I wanted to find out. I had to talk about it with him at my place, but he wouldn't go. Now I saw I was losing my only friend I had. And I had one of my first depression when I was 13 years old. Well, the first depression I had was when I was 10 after I had read one Soviet juvenile book about after-the-war children in the USSR. This book, its stories emanated such an agonizing sadness, a dweller in me. Not so long ago I found this book and tried to reread it. I put it away. I immediately felt that my first depression. These kinds of books were sometimes released for children. The writer was a woman, by the way, who has written this book. Anyways, I was all alone in town now. I stopped going to that works. Fuck them. Okay, I thought, when I'm back at school, I'll get even with all of them. I had dethroned Stepan himself, the fittest in the class once, and I made him an outcast and set my whole class against him. I would get even with all of them. I'll see to it. Still, I felt hurt. Andrei, my friend, was against me. This I could never forgive. Now I kept company with Sergei, the guy my parents could not stand. Maybe because of him my parents took me to another school, the closest to my new home. It was a shame. Among other things, I had a plan to rule my class with Sergei's help. This time I was going to be tough, even cruel to them. I was bursting with revenge and I wanted blood. And Valia, our next-door woman, also noticed that I was no longer palling around with Andrei, and she felt bad about it too. She liked him. He suddenly showed up a month later. He came to take his enlarger lens back. He came with his neighborhood friend who came for the summer. I gave it to him without saying a word to him and closed the door on him. He had asked me though, "You haven't twisted its neck, have you?" Fuck you! This fall I went to a different school, all right. Got myself enrolled again in the wrestling school. I still stayed in touch with Sergey. Next summer I suddenly met with Andrei. I and Zhenya were playing football behind that single railroad track near his home, and a group of boys joined us. Andrei was in that group too. All the boys were younger than him, and that meant he had nobody to keep company with. Zhenya had asked me if I didn't mind Andrei playing with us. It was okay with me unless he played on my side. I felt that this man was determined to make peace with me. The team he was in lost the game, but he was in a good mood anyway. When I went to a bus stop to go home, he went with me. I didn't care much about it, but since he went with me, I was finally going to have that conversation with him. Okay, what had caused his hostile attitude towards me? That he was seeing a girl and I was sort of on his way to it. When I came to him that afternoon, the day I was asking about a camera he was going to buy, he had a date with her I had messed with. Why didn't you just tell me about it? I would understand and leave. It didn't feel right. You were my guest after all. What would it look like if I had sent you back home? What did it look like to terminate our friendship instead? He said nothing. He awkwardly offered to make peace instead. We shook hands. We resumed our friendship. It was good enough to pay each other occasional short visits, but it was nothing like it used to be. We never printed pictures together, neither had we traded our books. Now I understand that he must have tired of me and did not find anything better than to break off any kind of relations with me. Since I had no friends in town, I must have been harassing him with my frequent visits, while he already was dating a girl. In the end, I did the same thing to Fat Sergey. I stay in touch with him on social networks.